My name is Karen Morgan, and I was 37 years old when the life I thought I understood collapsed in on itself. 5 years ago, my ex-husband and I sat at the dining table in the house we'd raised our children in, drinking lukewarm coffee and talking like two adults who believed they were doing the right thing. After 12 years of marriage, we agreed we had simply grown apart. There was no shouting match, no dramatic betrayal, just exhaustion and quiet disappointment. At least that's what I believed at the time. We promised each other we'd handle the divorce with dignity. We agreed to split everything evenly: assets, savings, responsibilities. Most importantly, we agreed on shared custody of our two kids, who were 6 and 4 back then. I remember suggesting we use a mediator, thinking it would keep emotions from spiraling and protect the kids from unnecessary trauma. I was proud of us, proud that we weren't turning into one of those couples who destroyed each other out of spite. I had no idea how naive I was. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a formal email from his lawyer. I opened it expecting procedural language, maybe a clarification about timelines or paperwork. Instead, I was hit with words that made my hands go cold. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, neglectful parenting. I read the email 3 times, convinced I was misunderstanding it. My ex-husband, Ethan, was accusing me of controlling all our finances. He claimed I limited his access to money, monitored his spending, and treated him like a child who needed permission to live his own life. He said I was emotionally distant, verbally dismissive, and uninterested in our children's emotional needs. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding, my stomach twisting into something sharp and painful. None of it was true. We had always had joint accounts. Always. We made financial decisions together, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with arguments, but never with control. If anything, I was the one pushing him to be more involved. I wanted us to be a team. I believed we were a team. As for our kids, they were the center of my universe. I packed lunches, scheduled appointments, helped with homework, sat up late with fevers and nightmares. I didn't disappear. I didn't neglect them. I loved them with everything I had. What hurt the most wasn't just the lies. It was the realization that Ethan wasn't just angry or lashing out. He was building a case. Soon, the accusations escalated. Court filings followed. Suddenly, moments from our marriage were twisted into something dark and sinister. A disagreement about budgeting became financial coercion. A quiet night after work became emotional withdrawal. Normal marital tension was repackaged as evidence of abuse. It felt like watching someone take your life apart piece by piece and reassemble it into something unrecognizable. But I kept telling myself one thing: at least my family knows me. My parents had watched me grow up. My siblings knew my heart. They had seen me as a wife, as a mother, as a person who always put others first. Surely they would see through this. I was wrong. My mother was the first to pull away. She stopped answering my calls. When she finally did, her voice was cautious, measured, like she was speaking to someone she didn't quite trust. "Well," she said carefully, "Ethan's always been so gentle with the kids." My father avoided eye contact when I confronted him in person. He told me he just wanted to stay neutral, but neutrality looked a lot like silence. And silence, I learned quickly, can be louder than betrayal. The worst blow came from my brother. He told me he believed Ethan. He said it made sense, that maybe I didn't even realize how controlling I'd been, that sometimes people hurt others without meaning to. I felt like I was screaming underwater. When the court date arrived, I still clung to the belief that truth would matter. That once a judge heard my side, once facts replaced accusations, everything would balance out. Then my brother took the stand. He testified, under oath, that he had seen me act controlling, that he'd noticed Ethan walking on eggshells around me, that he believed I dominated our household emotionally and financially. I don't know what hurt more, that he said it, or that he said it so confidently. I couldn't tell if he genuinely believed the lies, or if he'd convinced himself they were true because it was easier than questioning Ethan's narrative. Either way, his testimony shattered any illusion I had left. The ruling came swiftly. Ethan was granted full custody. I was allowed supervised visits, like I was some kind of threat. On top of that, the court ordered me to pay significantly more in alimony than we had ever discussed during mediation. I walked out of that courtroom feeling hollow. I hadn't just lost a case. I had lost my children's everyday lives. I had lost my reputation. I had lost my family's trust. And I had lost the version of myself who believed fairness was guaranteed if you did everything right. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, staring at photos of my kids on my phone. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was only the beginning. The weeks after the court ruling passed in a blur I can barely remember. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, one bedroom, thin walls, and a silence that felt louder than any argument Ethan and I had ever had. The first night there, I slept on the floor because my mattress hadn't been delivered yet. I remember staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering how my life had unraveled so completely in such a short amount of time. The worst part wasn't the space. It was knowing my kids weren't there. Instead of waking them up for school, packing lunches, arguing over socks and shoes, I now waited for permission to see them. Permission. That word burned every time it crossed my mind. Supervised visits were scheduled every other weekend at a family services center, a cheerful building, brightly painted, filled with toys meant to make children feel safe. To me, it felt like a courtroom disguised as a playroom. Every interaction was watched. Every hug was noted. Every laugh felt like it could be misinterpreted. The first time I saw my kids there, my daughter clung to my leg like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. My son was quieter, standing a few steps back, his eyes darting nervously between me and the supervisor sitting in the corner with a clipboard. I smiled. I always smiled, no matter how much my chest ached. I told myself this was temporary. That truth had a way of surfacing. That logic would prevail. But outside those walls, Ethan's version of events was spreading faster than I could keep up with. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when I entered the aisle. At school pickup, on the rare occasions I was allowed to attend, other parents avoided eye contact. A woman I'd known for years pulled her child closer when she saw me, as if abuse were contagious. Once, a stranger approached me in the parking lot and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself." I didn't even know how to respond. I just stood there, keys shaking in my hand, watching her walk away like she'd just done her civic duty. Ethan leaned into the role he'd created for himself. He spoke softly. He looked tired but brave. He told people how hard it was to protect the kids while maintaining boundaries with me. He became a local example of quiet strength, the devoted father navigating the aftermath of an abusive marriage. And my family stood behind him. My parents stopped inviting me to family dinners. Holidays came and went without an invitation. When I reached out, I was met with careful, scripted responses. "We just need time. This is very complicated. We're trying to do what's best for the kids." What they never said was, "We believe you." My brother stopped returning my calls altogether. The loneliness was suffocating. I'd spent my whole life being the reliable one, the peacemaker, the helper, the daughter who showed up. Now, when I needed support the most, I was completely alone. I tried to fight back the right way. I hired a lawyer, though my savings were draining fast. I submitted financial records, calendars, emails, anything that showed consistency, involvement, reality. But every time I thought I'd made progress, another accusation surfaced. Ethan claimed I had emotional outbursts. He implied my stress levels made me unstable. He suggested that supervised visits were necessary for the kids' emotional safety. Each claim chipped away at something inside me. I started questioning myself, replaying memories, wondering if I'd missed something, if I'd unknowingly become the villain in my own story. That doubt was the most dangerous thing of all. Therapy became a lifeline. I sat in a small office once a week, learning how to breathe through panic, how to untangle grief from guilt. My therapist helped me name what I was experiencing, not just loss, but betrayal trauma. "Your support system collapsed," she said gently. "That kind of betrayal rewires how you see the world." She was right. I no longer trusted instincts that had guided me my entire life. Meanwhile, Ethan's life seemed to flourish. He started a blog about healing after emotional abuse. He wrote about reclaiming his voice, about choosing peace for the sake of the kids. People praised his vulnerability, shared his posts, left comments thanking him for being brave enough to speak out. Each post felt like another nail sealing my reputation into place. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to tell my side of the story. But my lawyer warned me not to engage publicly. Anything I said could be twisted, used against me. Silence, once again, was my safest option. So I endured. I focused on my kids during the limited time I had. I memorized the curve of their smiles, the sound of their laughter, afraid that if I didn't, I'd forget. Every goodbye after a visit felt like reopening a wound that never fully healed. At night, I cried quietly into my pillow so the neighbors wouldn't hear. And then slowly something inside me shifted. I realized that waiting for someone else to save me, to suddenly see the truth, was pointless. If justice ever came, it would have to be earned. So I started documenting everything. Every email, every text, every inconsistency. I requested bank statements going back years. I kept calendars showing school pickups, doctor visits, birthday parties I'd planned. I wrote down dates, conversations, anything that felt even remotely important. It became my quiet rebellion. I didn't know when or if I'd get the chance to use it, but collecting the truth gave me something Ethan had taken away: control. I stopped begging my family to listen. I stopped explaining myself to people who'd already decided who I was. Instead, I focused on survival. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't possibly imagine, was that the truth wouldn't come from a courtroom or an apology. It would come from the last person I ever expected. And when it did, it would change everything. The next few years didn't pass so much as they wore me down. Life after the ruling settled into a cruel routine. I worked, I waited, I visited my kids under supervision, and I went home alone, over and over again. From the outside, it probably looked like I was coping. I showed up on time, I paid my bills, I didn't fall apart in public. But inside, I was barely holding myself together. The financial hit was the first thing that truly scared me. Between legal fees, increased alimony, and the career damage caused by Ethan's accusations, my savings evaporated faster than I could comprehend. Jobs I was qualified for suddenly stopped calling back. One hiring manager I knew personally pulled me aside and whispered, "I'm sorry, people are talking." That was the moment I understood how deeply his story had infected everything. In a small community, reputations don't just crack, they shatter. And once people decide who you are, facts stop mattering. I downsized again, this time into a smaller place closer to work. I sold furniture. I canceled subscriptions. Therapy stayed. Everything else was negotiable. Therapy was the only place I allowed myself to be honest. Some sessions, I cried the entire hour. Other times, I sat in silence, staring at the carpet, unable to articulate the weight pressing on my chest. My therapist helped me see that what hurt most wasn't just losing my marriage or even custody, it was losing my identity. I had gone from Karen, the dependable one, to Karen, the problem. And worst of all, my kids were growing up believing a version of that lie. My daughter started asking questions I wasn't prepared for. Why can't we come to your house more? Why does Dad say you get tired easily? I learned how to answer carefully, gently, without anger, without blame. I never spoke badly about Ethan, no matter how much it burned. I told myself that one day, when they were older, they'd understand. But there were nights I lay awake wondering if that was just another lie I was telling myself to survive. Ethan continued thriving in the spotlight of sympathy. His blog gained followers. He was invited to speak at support groups. People praised his strength and restraint. He became the man who had endured abuse and come out kinder. Sometimes I'd scroll through the comments and feel physically sick. They called me manipulative, cold, dangerous. None of them had ever met me. I considered breaking my silence more times than I can count, writing my own post, sharing my truth. But every legal consultation ended the same way. Not yet. Don't give them ammunition. Wait. So I waited. And while I waited, I prepared. What started as basic documentation turned into something more methodical. I requested full financial histories, every joint account, every transaction. I organized calendars, school emails, medical records. I highlighted contradictions in Ethan's statements, dates that didn't line up, claims that couldn't coexist with documented reality. At first, it felt pointless, like shouting into the void. But slowly, it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. I made a promise to myself during one particularly hard night, sitting on the floor with papers spread around me like evidence in a crime scene. If the truth ever gets a chance to speak, I'll be ready. I didn't know how or when that moment would come. I just knew I wouldn't be caught unprepared again. The hardest moments were the goodbyes. Every visit ended the same way. My kids packing up their things, glancing back at me, their faces a mixture of affection and confusion. My daughter tried to be brave. My son avoided eye contact. Once, after they left, I sat in my car and screamed until my throat burned. Not because I was angry, because loving them from a distance felt like punishment for a crime I didn't commit. Time passed, slowly, painfully. And then, just when I had resigned myself to this being my life forever, something unexpected happened. An unfamiliar name appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "I think you deserve to know the truth." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. I had no idea that message would change the direction of everything, or that the person sending it was tied to Ethan in a way I never could have anticipated. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the exhaustion. Hope. I didn't open the email right away. I read the subject line over and over. "I think you deserve to know the truth," like it might disappear if I blinked. For 5 years, people had told me what I deserved. Silence, supervision, suspicion. No one had ever told me I deserved the truth. When I finally clicked it open, my hands were shaking. "My name is Lucas," it began. "I'm not sure how else to say this, but I'm currently in a relationship with Ethan. I'm reaching out because what he's told me about your marriage doesn't add up, and because I have proof." I had to stop reading. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Ethan, my ex-husband, had a boyfriend. That alone wasn't shocking. What stopped me cold was the word proof. I replied with a single sentence. "What kind of proof?" His response came almost immediately. He asked if we could talk, in person, if possible. He said he understood if I didn't trust him, but he couldn't live with what he knew. We met at a quiet cafe on the other side of town, neutral ground. I arrived early and sat with my back to the wall, a habit I'd picked up somewhere along the way. When Lucas walked in, I recognized him instantly, not from photos, but from the way he carried himself. Careful, worn down, like someone who'd been holding something heavy for too long. He didn't waste time. "I believed him at first," he said, his voice low. "Everything he said about you. The abuse, the control, the fear." I nodded. I'd heard that story before. "But then," he continued, "I started noticing patterns. He'd rehearse conversations before therapy. He'd slip up, say things that contradicted earlier stories. And when I questioned him about finances, he got defensive in a way that felt familiar." My stomach tightened. Lucas pulled out his phone. I recorded some things. At first, it was for my own safety. I didn't realize what I was collecting until later. He slid the phone across the table. The first audio clip was short. Ethan's voice was unmistakable, casual, almost amused. "They bought it completely," he said, laughing. "Your family, I mean. They were already primed. All I had to do was push the right buttons." My breath caught. Another clip played. "I mean, come on," Ethan scoffed. "Once you use the word financial abuse, people stop asking questions. It's like a magic spell." I felt nauseous. Lucas scrolled through text messages next. Screenshots of conversations where Ethan bragged about how easy it had been to turn my parents against me, how my brother wanted to be the hero, how predictable I was for staying quiet to protect the kids. One message made my vision blur. "She'll never fight back publicly," Ethan had written. "She's too worried about how it'll affect the kids. That's why this works." I pushed the phone away, tears spilling over before I could stop them. But Lucas wasn't finished. "There's more," he said quietly. He told me Ethan had admitted to coaching the kids before evaluations, teaching them which words to use, how to phrase their discomfort. He said it gently, like he was explaining something fragile, but the words shattered me anyway. I thought about my son's hesitation, my daughter's careful answers. It hadn't been confusion. It had been conditioning. When I got home that night, I didn't sleep. I listened to the recordings over and over, each time feeling a different emotion rise to the surface. Relief, rage, vindication, grief for the years I'd lost. At dawn, I emailed my lawyer. "We need to talk. I have evidence." The process moved faster than I expected. Lucas provided a sworn affidavit. He turned over everything: texts, recordings, timelines. My lawyer's tone changed instantly from cautious to focused. "This is substantial," she said. "This changes everything." For the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to believe her. The fallout was immediate. When word reached Ethan that Lucas had come forward, he panicked. He sent me emails I didn't respond to, long, emotional messages alternating between anger and desperation. He accused me of manipulating Lucas, claimed it was a setup, threatened to fight back. But the damage was already done. My lawyer filed to reopen the custody arrangement. We submitted the evidence. We requested a hearing. That was when my family reappeared. My mother called first, crying, apologizing, saying she'd been confused and misled. My father followed, with a voicemail asking if we could talk like adults. My brother showed up at my door 2 days later. He looked smaller than I remembered. "I didn't know," he said. "He lied to all of us." I stared at him, thinking of the courtroom, of his confident testimony, of the way he'd looked at me like a stranger. "You chose to believe him," I said quietly. "That wasn't a misunderstanding." He started to cry, begged me not to pursue legal action, said his job could be at risk if this went public, that he'd only been trying to protect the kids. The irony almost made me laugh. Protecting the kids was what I'd been doing all along. Instead, I told him I needed time, space, accountability. Because apologies, no matter how emotional, didn't give me back birthdays, or bedtime stories, or trust. As the hearing date approached, I sat with my kids one evening, helping with homework like it was any other night. My daughter looked up at me suddenly and asked, "Is something changing?" I swallowed. "Yes," I said softly, "something is." And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what came next. I felt ready. The hearing date hung over everything like a storm cloud. Once the motion to reopen custody was filed, the tone of my life shifted almost overnight. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my number. My parents called daily. Extended family members sent long messages filled with carefully chosen words: family, healing, moving forward, as if repeating them often enough would undo what had already been done. What none of them seemed to understand was this: I wasn't frozen in the past. I was standing in the wreckage they helped create, deciding whether to rebuild with them or without them. My lawyer laid everything out plainly, with Lucas's affidavit, the recordings, the text messages, and the inconsistencies in Ethan's original testimony. We had strong grounds not just to revisit custody, but to pursue legal action for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That included my family, especially my brother. The night before I gave my lawyer the green light, my daughter asked if she could talk to me alone. She was 16 now, taller, sharper, more aware of the world than she'd been when everything fell apart. She sat on the edge of my bed and looked straight at me. "Why didn't you fight harder before?" she asked quietly. The question didn't come with accusation. It came with confusion, hurt. It still crushed me. I told her the truth as gently as I could, that I had fought, that I'd been told staying quiet was the safest way to protect them, that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look brave from the outside. She listened. Then she said something that changed everything. "You don't have to protect everyone else anymore," she said. "We're not little." I cried after she left the room. The next morning, I told my lawyer to proceed. When my family found out, panic set in. My brother showed up again, this time angry. He accused me of being vindictive, of trying to ruin his life. He said the past couldn't be changed, and that dragging everything into the open would only hurt the kids. I reminded him that he'd looked me in the eye and lied under oath. That shut him up. My parents begged me to reconsider. They said the lawsuit would destroy the family, that it would bring shame, that my mother's health couldn't handle the stress. I asked them where that concern had been when I was losing custody of my children. They didn't have an answer. The hearing itself was surreal. The judge listened intently as the recordings were played. One clip in particular shifted the air in the room, Ethan laughing about how easily my brother believed him because he always wanted to be the family hero. I didn't look at my brother when it played. I didn't need to. The judge ordered immediate changes. Ethan's visitation was reduced to supervise pending a full custody evaluation. My access to the kids was expanded immediately. It wasn't everything, but it was a crack in the wall. Afterward, my lawyer was approached by my family's attorney with a settlement offer. Public apologies, coverage of therapy costs, partial legal fees, and an NDA. They wanted silence. They wanted the truth buried now that it was inconvenient. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the offer. It would make life easier, quieter. It would end the phone calls, the tension, the constant strain. But it would also teach my kids something I couldn't live with, that people can destroy your life, and all they owe you is an apology when they're caught. I declined the settlement. The fallout was immediate. Relatives accused me of tearing the family apart. Old friends urged me to be the bigger person. Some even implied that I was enjoying the attention. What they didn't see were the nights I lay awake, heart racing, wondering how much more this fight would cost my children emotionally. But I also saw something else. My kids were watching, and they were learning that integrity isn't convenient, that accountability matters, that forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. As the civil case moved forward, more people came forward. Former friends of Ethan, members of his therapy group, women who admitted he'd bragged about gaming the system, about coaching stories, about playing the role people wanted to see. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was building momentum. And this time I wasn't running from it. I was standing in it. The final ruling came on a Tuesday morning, quietly, without ceremony. No dramatic gasps, no shouting, just the judge reading from a prepared statement while my heart hammered so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. Primary custody was awarded to me. Ethan would retain visitation rights, but they would remain supervised until further evaluations were completed. The judge cited the new evidence, the sworn affidavits, the recorded admissions, and, most importantly, the emotional well-being of the children. When the words finally sank in, my hands started shaking. 5 years. 5 years of being treated like a threat to my own children. And just like that, the narrative collapsed. I didn't celebrate in the way people imagine victories. I didn't cry in relief or jump into anyone's arms. I sat there, stunned, like someone who'd been holding their breath for so long they'd forgotten how to inhale. It wasn't joy I felt first. It was release. The custody decision sent ripples through everything else. The civil case against my family continued, but its tone changed. The evidence was undeniable now. The lies were no longer abstract accusations. They were documented, recorded, verified. My brother's lawyer pushed hard for leniency. He argued manipulation, good intentions, family loyalty. The judge wasn't moved. Intent doesn't excuse perjury, she said calmly. Adults are responsible for the consequences of their choices. That sentence alone felt like justice. The district attorney announced an investigation into false testimony. Ethan's carefully curated image began to fracture in public. His blog disappeared. Invitations dried up. Friends distanced themselves. The sympathy he'd once thrived on evaporated under the weight of truth. I didn't take pleasure in his downfall, but I didn't mourn it either. My family, on the other hand, struggled with the aftermath. My parents stopped trying to mediate once they realized I wouldn't bend. The constant messages slowed, then stopped. Some relatives quietly disappeared again. Others reached out with apologies that felt more like attempts to soothe their own guilt than understand mine. I accepted none of it blindly. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a doorway you're obligated to open just because someone knocks. It's something you choose, on your terms. At home, life slowly began to feel normal. My daughter helped me cook dinner, music playing softly, while she talked about school projects and college plans. My son, still quieter, asked one evening if we could build something together. We made a birdhouse on the back porch, arguing over measurements and laughing when it came out slightly crooked. Those moments mattered more than any verdict. Therapy continued, for all of us. The kids worked through anger, confusion, loyalty conflicts. I worked through the grief of lost time. There were scars we couldn't erase, but we were finally healing in a space that felt safe. One night, my daughter asked if I regretted not taking the settlement. I thought about it carefully before answering. No, I said, because the truth matters, and so do boundaries. She nodded, like she understood more than I'd expected. The civil case eventually concluded without fanfare. There were consequences. Not all of them were public. Some were quiet, legal, permanent, enough to ensure that what happened to me wouldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding ever again. And that was enough. Today, my life looks different than it did before the divorce. Smaller in some ways, stronger in others. I don't chase approval anymore. I don't beg to be believed. I trust myself. My kids know who I am, not the version written in court filings or whispered in grocery store aisles, but the woman who showed up even when it hurt. The woman who didn't trade truth for comfort. The woman who chose accountability over silence. Losing my family's support once broke me, but rebuilding my life without their lies saved me. And this time, the story is finally mine to tell.